On January 13th, 1968, inside the granite belly of Folsom State Prison, a confrontation took place that you won't find in the official warden's logs. The history books will tell you about the album. They will tell you about the cheering crowds, the raw energy of Folsom Prison blues, and the career comeback of a fading country star. But they leave out the most dangerous moment of the entire day. They don't mention the 50 armed guards standing on the catwalks with Thompson's submachine guns, fingers twitching on the triggers. They don't mention the specific order given to the snipers. If a riot starts, shoot to kill, and that includes the singer. And most importantly, they don't tell you that the difference between a massacre and a concert that day came down to a single, ordinary object. It wasn't a microphone. It wasn't a guitar. It was a cheap plastic water cup. This is the story of the silent riot that almost burned Folsom to the ground and the man in black who stopped it without firing a single shot. To understand why that cup of water was more powerful than a loaded gun, you have to understand the smell of Folsom that morning. It was a cold winter day in California, but inside the dining hall, the air was thick, humid, and suffocating. It smelled of three things: unwashed bodies, industrial cleaning chemicals, and pure, concentrated rage. The tension wasn't just in the air, it was vibrating in the concrete floor. The prisoners hadn't just been locked up, they had been tormented. Rumors had been circulating through the cell blocks for days. A fight had broken out in C Block the night before, a brutal stabbing over a pack of cigarettes. The administration's response was swift and cruel. They didn't just punish the fighters, they punished everyone. Collective punishment. They shut off the hot water in the showers, and worse, they restricted the drinking water supply to the cells in the chaotic hours leading up to the concert. 2,000 men, hardened by the system, were locked in steel cages, thirsty, angry, and being told to sit still and behave for a recording session. It was a recipe for disaster. The guards knew it, the warden knew it, and the moment Johnny Cash stepped off the bus, he knew it too. But Johnny wasn't like the other people in show business. He didn't just see a tough crowd. He felt the vibration. He knew what it was like to be trapped, to be hungry, to be withdrawing from pills in a dark room with no way out. When he walked through those double security gates, dragging his guitar case like a coffin, he wasn't visiting. He was coming home. He was met at the inner perimeter by the chief of guards, Chief Miller. Miller was a man who looked like he had been carved out of the same gray rock as the prison walls. He had dead eyes and a uniform that was pressed so sharp it could cut you. He hated everything Johnny Cash stood for. To Miller, Cash was just a junkie with a guitar who gave false hope to animals who deserved to rot. Miller stopped Johnny right there in the sally port, surrounded by the metallic clank of locking gates. He stepped close, invading Johnny's personal space. The smell of stale coffee and arrogance was heavy on his breath. "Listen to me, Cash," Miller said, his voice low and threatening. "I know you think you're some kind of hero to this scum, but today you're just a guest, and my men are on edge. These inmates haven't had a proper drink of water in 12 hours because they don't know how to act like human beings. If you stir them up, if you incite them, I will shut this whole circus down before you finish your first song. Do not talk to them, do not touch them, and for God's sake, do not give them anything." Johnny just looked at him. He didn't blink. He adjusted the strap of his guitar on his shoulder, his face a mask of stone. He didn't say, "Yes, sir." He didn't say, "No, sir." He just gave a slow, dark nod that could have meant anything. But deep in his eyes, a fire was already starting to burn. It was that old, familiar demon, the one that hated authority, the one that made him kick out the footlights at the Grand Ole Opry. Miller had just made a mistake. He had challenged the wrong man. The backstage area was a small holding area near the cafeteria. The Tennessee Three were there, Marshall Grant on bass, Luther Perkins on electric guitar, and W.S. Holland on drums. They were nervous. You could see it in the way Marshall kept retuning his bass over and over again. They could hear the low rumble of the crowd on the other side of the heavy steel doors. It didn't sound like an audience. It sounded like a thunderstorm trapped in a bottle. June Carter was there too, looking like a diamond in a coal mine. She was trying to keep the mood light, fixing Johnny's collar, whispering words of encouragement. But she felt it too. Johnny was pacing like a caged panther. He was dressed in black from head to toe. The long coat, the shirt, the pants. He looked less like a singer and more like an undertaker coming to collect souls. He wasn't talking. He was listening to the roar on the other side of the door, syncing his heartbeat to the rhythm of the prisoner's restlessness. "They're ready to blow, John," Marshal Grant whispered, wiping sweat from his forehead. "Maybe we should cut the set list short. Get in, play the hits, get out." Johnny stopped pacing. He turned to Marshall, his voice dropping an octave, that deep baritone rattling the small room. "We aren't cutting anything," Johnny said. "If they're ready to blow, then we're going to be the dynamite." The doors swung open. The noise hit them like a physical wave. 2,000 men crammed onto metal benches, surrounded by armed guards on the perimeter. The lights were harsh and fluorescent, casting long, sickly shadows. As Johnny walked toward the makeshift stage, he had to pass through a gauntlet of guards. He saw the way they looked at the inmates, with disgust, with fear, with hands hovering over their batons. But then he looked at the men. He saw the faces of the forgotten. He saw scars, tattoos, missing teeth, and eyes that held stories of pain that no judge or jury would ever hear. And he saw something else: thirst. Physical, parched thirst. He saw men licking their dry lips, swallowing hard, sweating in the stifling heat of the hall. And there, right in the front row, sitting just a few feet from the edge of the stage, was a kid named Billy. He couldn't have been more than 19. He had blonde hair cropped short and a face that still had the softness of youth, despite the bruise blooming on his cheekbone. Billy looked like he should be in a high school geometry class, not in Folsom Prison sitting next to murderers and thieves. He looked terrified. Johnny stepped up to the microphone. The room went silent for a split second, waiting. He grabbed the mic stand, leaned in, and delivered the most famous opening line in music history. "Hello, I'm Johnny Cash." The room exploded. The band kicked into Folsom Prison Blues, and the train left the station. For the next 40 minutes, it was magic. Johnny had them in the palm of his hand. He joked with them, he sang for them, he sang as them. He was channeling every ounce of their frustration into that microphone. But as the concert went on, the heat in the room kept rising. The ventilation was poor, and with 2,000 bodies packed together, the oxygen was getting thin. Johnny was sweating through his black coat. He could see the prisoners suffering. The guards, however, were comfortable. Along the sidewalls, there were coolers filled with ice and sodas for the security staff. During a pause between songs, while Luther was tuning up for "Dark as a Dungeon," Johnny saw it happen. Young Billy, the kid in the front row, leaned forward. He whispered something to the guard standing directly in front of the stage, a hulking man with a sour expression. Billy pointed to his throat, making a pleading gesture. He was asking for water, just a sip. The guard didn't even look at him. He just smirked, took a long, slow swig from his own bottle of Coca-Cola, and then deliberately poured the rest of it onto the concrete floor, right in front of Billy's feet. The dark liquid sizzled on the dusty floor. It was a power move, a petty, cruel display of dominance. The prisoner next to Billy clenched his fists. A ripple of agitation went through the front rows. A murmur started to rise, uglier than the cheers from the fore. The guards on the catwalks tightened their grips on their rifles. This was it, the spark. Johnny saw it all. He was in the middle of introducing the next song, but the words died in his throat. He looked at the guard. He looked at the wasted soda on the floor. He looked at Billy's defeated, humiliated face. The music hadn't started yet, but the rhythm of the show was broken. The man in black persona wasn't an act anymore. It was real. The anger that boiled up in Johnny wasn't show business anger. It was the righteous fury of a man who had been kicked when he was down, who had spent nights in drunk tanks, who knew exactly what it felt like to be treated like trash by a man with a badge. He turned his back to the audience for a moment, facing his drummer, W.S. Holland. His eyes were wild. "Stop," he mouthed. W.S. stopped tapping the hi-hat. Marshall grabbed the neck of his bass to silence the strings. The sudden silence in the hall was deafening. It wasn't the silence of anticipation. It was the silence of a predator spotting prey. The prisoners sensed the shift. They stopped cheering. They watched Johnny. They watched the guards. Chief Miller, standing in the wings, stepped forward, his hand resting on his holster. He stared daggers at Johnny, his eyes screaming the warning he had given earlier. "Don't do it. Don't you dare." Johnny turned back to the microphone. He didn't start the song. He stood there, legs apart, guitar slung low, looking like a gunfighter in a town square. He slowly unhooked the microphone from the stand and began to walk, not to the center, but to the edge of the stage, right where the yellow tape marked the no cross line. He stopped inches from the edge. He was looming over the guard who had poured the soda on the floor. The guard looked up, suddenly looking very small beneath the towering figure of Johnny Cash. "It's getting mighty hot in here, isn't it?" Johnny rumbled into the mic. His voice was calm, but it had an edge like a razor blade. The crowd murmured in agreement. "Yes, yes." "Throat gets dry," Johnny continued, his eyes locked on the guard. "Mighty dry." Next to the drum kit, there was a small table for the band. On it was a silver pitcher of ice water and a stack of clean white plastic cups, reserved for the talent, reserved for the free men. Johnny turned, walked back to the table, and picked up the pitcher. Ice clinked against the metal. The sound echoed through the PA system. He grabbed a stack of cups. Then he walked back to the edge of the stage. He didn't stop at the yellow tape this time. He stepped over it. A collective gasp went through the room. The guards on the catwalk raised their rifles. You could hear the mechanical clack-clack of safety catches being disengaged. Chief Miller started to move onto the stage, shouting, "Cash, get back! That is a violation of protocol." Johnny ignored him. He ignored the rifles pointed at his chest. He ignored the career suicide he was committing. He walked right to the edge of the platform, crouched down, and looked Billy in the eye. The kid was trembling, terrified that he was about to be the cause of a shooting. Johnny held out a plastic cup. He poured the water. The sound of the water hitting the cup was the only sound in the room. It was crisp, clear, and defying every rule in that prison. Before we see how this act of defiance ended, if you are enjoying this journey into the real history of Johnny Cash, please take a second to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Now, let's go back to that razor's edge. Johnny held the cup out. The water inside rippled, catching the harsh glare of the prison lights. For a moment, Billy didn't move. He looked at the cup, then at the guard's boots, then up at Johnny's face. He was paralyzed by the implications. Taking that cup was an act of rebellion. "Take it, son," Johnny said. He didn't use the microphone this time. He just spoke man to man. The sound of his voice cut through the static in the kid's head. Billy reached out. His hand was shaking so badly that he almost knocked the cup over. His fingers brushed against Johnny's, the calloused hand of a cotton picker turned superstar, touching the trembling hand of a convict. Billy took the cup. He brought it to his cracked lips and drank. He didn't just sip. He gulped it down as if it were life itself. The guard, who had poured the soda on the floor, took a step forward, his baton raising instinctively. But before he could move, a sound stopped him. It wasn't a shout. It was the sound of Marshall Grant's bass guitar. Thump, thump. Thump, thump. A heartbeat. The Tennessee Three had started playing, low and menacing. Johnny didn't step back. He took the pitcher and poured another cup. He handed it to the old man sitting next to Billy, a lifer with a scar running down his face. The old man took it with a nod of profound dignity. Johnny poured another, and another. He was emptying the pitcher meant for the stars and giving it to the scum. Then, with the pitcher half empty, Johnny did something that would be talked about in Folsom for decades. He lifted the silver vessel, tilted his head back, and poured the remaining ice water over his own face and hair. The water drenched his black shirt, mixing with his sweat. He shook his head like a wet dog, spraying droplets everywhere, onto the stage, onto the guards, onto the prisoners. He wiped his eyes, looked at the furious Chief Miller, and grinned. A crooked, defiant grin. "Now," Johnny roared into the microphone, his voice revitalized, "I feel a whole lot better. How about you?" The crowd didn't riot. They didn't attack the guards. They did something far more powerful. They cheered. But this wasn't the chaotic, angry noise from before. This was a roar of solidarity, a roar of validation. For the first time in years, someone had looked at them and seen men, not numbers. By sharing their thirst, Johnny had defused the bomb. The guard with the baton slowly lowered his arm. He looked around and realized he was outnumbered, not by force, but by moral authority. The moment had passed. The sniper on the catwalk took his finger off the trigger. Chief Miller stood in the wings, his face a mask of impotent rage, watching as Johnny Cash turned a prison riot into a revival. The rest of the concert was a blur of raw energy. Johnny played Greystone Chapel, a song written by one of the inmates right there in Folsom. When he announced that, the walls shook. He wasn't just performing for them, he was performing with them. The barrier between the stage and the cell block had dissolved. When the final chord of the final song rang out, the applause was deafening. It sounded like thunder rolling across the California plains. Johnny stood there, dripping wet, exhausted, holding his guitar like a shield. He looked at Billy one last time. The kid was smiling. It was a small, shy smile, but the terror was gone from his eyes. Johnny bowed. He turned and walked off the stage, back into the shadows of the holding area. The band followed, buzzing with adrenaline. Chief Miller was waiting for him. The chief blocked the exit path, his arms crossed. The vein in his forehead was throbbing. The air in the narrow hallway was cold, a sharp contrast to the furnace of the dining hall. "You crossed the line, Cash. You humiliated my officer. You broke safety protocol. You could have gotten us all killed." Johnny stopped. He handed his guitar to Luther Perkins. He stepped close to Miller, towering over him. The smell of the prison, that mix of bleach and misery, was still clinging to Johnny's wet clothes. "No, Chief," Johnny said, his voice quiet and deep, rumbling from the bottom of his chest. "I didn't almost get you killed. I saved your damn neck. You treat a man like a dog, he's gonna bite you eventually. You treat him like a man, maybe he'll act like one." Miller sneered. "They are criminals, rapists, murderers. They don't deserve your water or your sympathy." Johnny reached into his pocket. He pulled out a cigarette and lit it, the flame illuminating the hard lines of his face. He took a long drag and blew the smoke towards the ceiling. "I've done things in my life, Chief, that could have put me in one of those cells. I've hurt people. I've broken laws. I've walked in the darkness. The only difference between me and the men in that hall is that I had a guitar and a God who wouldn't let me go. You see criminals. I see men who are paying for their sins, and until they're done paying, the least you can do is let them have a drink of water." He didn't wait for a response. He walked past the chief, his boots echoing on the concrete floor. Clack, clack, clack. As he walked toward the heavy steel doors that led to the outside world, to freedom, Johnny felt a heavy weight on his shoulders. It was the weight of leaving them behind. He was going back to his hotel, to a warm bed, to June. They were going back to their cages. He paused at the gate as the guard buzzed it open. He looked back at the prison complex, looming dark and gray against the sky. That feeling, that deep, aching connection to the downtrodden, was swirling inside him. It was a feeling that would haunt him, but also drive him. Years later, people would ask him why he always wore black. Why, even when he met presidents, even when he played the biggest arenas in the world, did he dress like he was going to a funeral? Some thought it was a fashion statement. Some thought it was to look cool. But Johnny gave the real answer in a song, written with the dust of Folsom still in his lungs. He wrote, "I wear the black for the poor and the beaten down. I wear it for the prisoner who has long paid for his crime, but is there because he's a victim of the times." That day at Folsom, when he handed a plastic cup of water to a terrified kid named Billy, wasn't a stunt. It was the baptism of the man in black. It was the moment Johnny Cash decided that as long as there was darkness in the world, he would carry a piece of it on his back, so that those hiding in the shadows wouldn't feel so alone. Billy never forgot it, and neither did the guards, because on that day, they learned that you can lock a man up, you can take his freedom, you can even take his water, but you can never, ever take his song. And that is the untold story of the silent riot at Folsom Prison. If this story moved you, if you believe in the power of redemption and the legacy of the man in black, honor his memory by hitting that subscribe button. We have hundreds of untold stories waiting in the archives, stories of rebellion, love, and the gritty truth of American music history. Join us, because here, the legend never dies.